Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
All right, well, Luke, first of all, thanks for hopping on for a couple minutes with us. I've started this series where I want to talk to as many insiders, scouting directors, reporters, etc., around the country to give unique perspectives. And you have one of the most unique stories that I've ever heard from a sports reporter. I've spent a couple of years obviously doing this. And when we first talked on the phone, your situation, what you do, just made me smile. So I'd love for you to just kind of explain kind of your day-to-day operations and who all you cover and as many places as you cover.
For sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me on the show. Glad to be here. And in terms of my story, it was one where I started in sports media when I was 14 turning 15 there in fall of my freshman year of high school. So got into it that way as a sideline reporter for my high school's web stream. Eventually just enjoyed it so much, I wanted to pursue it in college. I got a kind of opportunity from a smaller Division II school in Central Georgia that would allow me to cover basketball, soccer, some of the sports that I thought maybe I could find a future in. And went down there to broadcast, helping out, working in the athletics department. Picked up an opportunity working with ESPN Plus off of the demo and some of the connections I had from that high school D2 level. And I was broadcasting college sports and still am now in year 4 of SoCon, Southern Conference Sports on ESPN Plus. And if you know anything about the SoCon, they're a league that, in football, basketball can give some of the bigger schools some money, a run for their money. So sure. They have some of those Power 5 games. We get to see like Wake Forest basketball and Auburn and Alabama football occasionally. So it's been fun, to be a part of, whether I've been the play-by-play guy or the producer for the broadcast. So that was the way of establishing some credibility for me and starting to build a name. And eventually in June, I picked up an opportunity to cover Clemson as one of the beat writers for ClemsonSportsTalk.com. So helping out with the Fox Sports radio station and that show up there, doing hits on radio, and then writing some articles, everything from recruiting at the grassroots level to covering the games, 10 Clemson games this year I got to cover. And then after that, going into the NFL draft and now covering a lot of the Clemson players that at this point, we're not totally sure where they are going to fall because there's plenty of question marks with that group. So it's always exciting at Clemson. There's plenty of talent, plenty of potential, but covering that beat, it can be frustrating at times. It's exciting at times and gives you a full emotional cycle throughout that fall season.
Sure. No doubt about it. I remember some of what I did when I was at Texas A&M and the experiences I have there, draft season, just covering them on a week-to-week basis. I can certainly empathize. And then not only that, you didn't even mention you currently go to the University of Georgia. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I wasn't sure how much bio you wanted there. So I transferred to UGA. I'm still broadcasting with ESPN Plus, covering Clemson. Yeah. And I'm in the UGA sports media program. So finishing up as a student here and really getting to sharpen some skills with professors that have really shown me a lot of good things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just an incredible resume run sheet, just day to day that you do. You're always on the move. You're always on Twitter at Luke Winstel on Twitter. That's where I found you initially. I want to say either early last year or maybe as far back as 2020. I can't remember, but had been following you for a while and just respected the hustle, respected the grind, loved the effort that you were putting into play-by-play. That's my background as well. And it was fun to get to connect with you and obviously bring you on the show to talk some Clemson football, talk Senior Bowl. You were down in at the Senior Bowl covering all things NFL draft. So let's get into it, man. And let's first start with Clemson. This was as you mentioned, your first year kind of covering that beat, 10 games that you got to cover directly. And, for the last several years, Clemson has grown into this seemingly unstoppable force, right? They came out of kind of like Alabama, where they had a lot of mediocre years, and then Dabo Swinney built them up. They had a bad year, quote unquote,
Yeah.
2 seasons ago, and they won 10 games, right? I mean, it's not anything to sneeze at. This year, the offense was extremely disappointing. What did you see from DJ Uiagalelei and then from Cade Klubnik at quarterback, where a lot of the headlines ultimately went?
So the hard part of when you're game in, game out, you're watching these games against Furman and Louisiana Tech early on in the season, and you're saying, wait a minute, Clemson used to beat these teams by 50, or if they didn't want to be aggressive, it'd be like 42-3, and where is that? That was the issue this year. DJ would play well enough to get a win, but not well enough that we could see Klubnik play much in the second half. It was good, but not great. I think a lot of fans were. Clemson's got this motto. Some people still have it on their license plates on their car. The best is the standard. And it felt like for a while this season that just wasn't true. It was like, what happened to that? Why are they accepting this quarterback play that's subpar? And whenever Klubnik would get a chance, it was like against Notre Dame, you're backed up in your own red zone. Hey, go get it, kid, and then throws a pick and they pull him right back. And these kinds of things, like there were moments like that throughout the year did they get that right in terms of putting him in, playing it? So it was a little awkward with that this season. But when DJ would go in and be playing, it would be a little hard to watch. It was slow. It was lethargic at times. And not just him, it just felt like the offense lacked a spark. And DJ's a good player. I don't think the play calling, I don't think the coaching this year maximized or came close to putting him in good positions, especially in some big games like the second half of South Carolina. Kind of got to the thing where we're sitting up there in the press box saying, okay, they just can't get a first down. It's just not happening. It's not meant to be. And, that was the moment where, as optimistic as you were, if you were one of those Clemson people that thought that team should have been in the conversation for a playoff spot, if they'd beaten South Carolina, then won the ACC, they're a one-loss team. That game was the one where it was like, okay, what people were saying is true. This team is not the Clemson of the past. It's not that caliber. It's maybe 12 to 18 ranked type of team. They're very good, very talented, but didn't put it together. And quarterback was a big reason why. The explosiveness. There were games where a 29-yard pass would be the longest play offensively of the entire game. At Clemson, That's not going to cut it. But with Klubnik, for him coming in, it was impressive to see some of the instinct he has, his ability to really leave it all out on the field. He's a very compelling, likable figure. So for Klubnik, a lot of people are going to be rooting for him because he's got the charisma. He's got the ability to rally a team as a younger player. He's done it on the big stages in Texas football. And that ACC championship game, I think, even though the Orange Bowl wasn't great for Clemson, that game still inspires a lot of hope because of the way that he was going out there, lighting it up, slinging the ball downfield, finding some receivers that weren't big name guys. And he was able to get it done. So he's got potential.
Well, and you read my mind. That was kind of the next question that I had. You win an ACC championship game, right? I mean, you finish this year at 11-3 with the conference title. You blow out North Carolina, but then it's such a sour note from, where I sit watching Tennessee win 31-14. And again, it was kind of like, oh man, what is this offense going to look like on a drive to drive basis? So DJU transfers out. He's over at Oregon State. Cade Klubnik is now the guy. What is kind of the temperature of Tiger fans heading into 2023? We just wrapped up the recruiting class. We'll talk about that in a minute. But on-field product, as far as projecting forward to this next season, how are Clemson fans feeling?
There's optimism because of the Garrett Riley hire. I think that does a lot, and I think it even masks a little of the skepticism that should be there. You look at the Orange Bowl, special teams was just horrendous. It's the worst I've seen Clemson special teams in a while. And I guess you're going to have you shouldn't have games like that sometimes, but Clemson had that kind of a game. They probably should have been able to overcome it, but they didn't quite have the talent at those skill positions that I really am concerned about. So you look at the running back depth chart, it's going to be good this year. Shipley and Maffa, that's a top 10 duo in college football. I don't think I'd get a lot of pushback for saying that.
Mm-hmm.
But the receiver group, on the other hand, Antonio Williams has shown some potential. I'm not totally sold on him as a wide receiver one guy, but he is the wide receiver one at Clemson because it's a lack of talent. And the guy that Cade Klubnik was connecting with best at the receiver position, Joseph Ngata, is now off to the NFL draft, or he's going to get a chance at the NFL. So at those positions at receiver, Riley's scheming better be good, because I don't think that this Clemson team is going to be able to compete with the upper echelon of college football if they're not more explosive. And Cade can only give you so much, and OC can only give you so much. So that is the biggest concern for me at Clemson. The recruiting class put in a couple of 4-stars at receiver, but I don't see those guys as immediate impact. They might play in a couple of games, probably redshirt candidates, most of them in the receiver group. So the running back duo is good. The depth behind that duo, I'm concerned about for the future. But for now, the biggest concern is receiver. Riley provides the optimism that the play calling, the creativity can help mask that. But I'm still skeptical. I'm still concerned of just how that playmaking will be. And, Klubnik can elevate receivers. He's shown that. But
Sure.
How much is it going to really be able to do?
Well, and that's a good point, because we can move into Clemson recruiting now too. I mean, I want to talk Garrett Riley as well, but composite, Clemson finishes at number 11th. The overall, according to 247, was 15th. You talk about the receiver question, who's kind of the guy on the roster, and then I look down the Clemson recruiting page, and it's just a couple of receivers, like you mentioned, maybe headline, if you can call it that, by Noble Johnson, who's actually a Rockwall product just right down the street from me. I remember early on in the process, I was really hoping to get a look from Texas A&M, and for whatever reason, it just never quite came. And Clemson hopped on that bandwagon early and got his attention. So where do you see maybe a playmaker emerging, or how do you see Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik elevating a wide receiver core that might not catch your eye when looking at it on paper, but still obviously needing to deliver championship level results?
The biggest thing is going to be finding ways to get some of those explosive plays. So that involves even as simple as basic as this is in football, of just knowing what your player's strengths are and trying to utilize it. I felt like a lot of times last year, DJU is not Lamar Jackson. He's not Michael Vick. Why is he running on these counter plays? Why are they, trying to do this with this guy? And maybe it was effective here and there, but it was some things that's not his strength. Let's use him at his strength. And that was one of the issues with play calling last year. The other things too were Antonio Williams. If you believe in him as a deep threat, then let it fly. Why are we seeing so many screenplays, or why are we seeing him having to block so much if he's going to be the featured receiver? So as simple as DJ had an arm, I don't think we saw that get showcased enough. Maybe the coaches didn't trust it. I don't know. But Cade Klubnik can throw it downfield. We saw that touchdown again to Turner, down in the bottom corner of the ACC championship, if you go back and watch that highlight. And he can sling it. He's not afraid to do it. So being able to say, who are our deep threats? Let's let them go. And with the play calling, those kinds of things of Clemson's receivers, the way they've recruited, and I'm not totally sure why they haven't mixed it up more, but a lot of the receivers have a similar build. They're these big, tall guys, broad shoulders. I'm sure if you've seen Noble Johnson in person, you know exactly the type I'm talking about.
Right, yeah.
So that's their type. And a lot of guys will fit that, like Dakari Collins, who just transferred out, fit that kind of a vibe, and they're built to play the boundary. So let's see those guys get some boundary opportunities. And I just don't think we saw enough. That's part of why Dakari transferred. He could go up and get jump balls, and worst comes to worst, he'd get a pass interference call. I don't think Collins developed enough, but I think he also deserved more opportunity than he did get. So just being able to say, okay, if you're going to recruit these boundary types, let's see some one-on-ones. Let's see Klubnik fire away and have to make those tough throws, sideline to sideline.
I think it's interesting that you point out kind of the same, almost like not a cookie cutter mold, because that has negative connotations, but Clemson has a type, right? Like you mentioned, with their wide receivers. So I'm interested to see Garrett Riley coming in now, how this offense is going to look, maybe slightly different, maybe vastly different as we head into 2023. Dabo was known and is known as a guy who likes a lot of staff continuity, right? I mean, he likes his guys, and that's how he likes to build his football program. With Garrett Riley now coming in, with the resume intact of taking TCU to a national championship game behind a really fun offense, what do y'all, as Clemson fans, as Clemson reporters, feel like the fit is for Garrett Riley? And is there any sort of, you mentioned the optimism earlier, is there any sort of yes, but with Riley coming in being as young as he is?
My thing that I'm curious to see, and I'm taking a patient approach to Riley, because you look at TCU and people are quick to look at his personnel or look at this and that. Well, that wasn't his TCU offense. He didn't design, every recruited prospect. He didn't pick every player. I mean, the scheme I'm sure was his own, but that's I'm getting at the player and roster construction here of how he developed that. So when you look at what he'll do, you almost have to look at his previous stops, but that's not comparable to the way that it would look at Clemson. So for Riley, I'm curious to see a bit of what he did at TCU with the ability of, I don't think Klubnik and Duggan are similar, but I think Klubnik has the big play ability that Duggan has and a little of that innate trait to him in terms of being able to have the instincts to move the ball and to have a good feel for the game. So Riley can play off of that by trusting his quarterback as an underclassman. So I like that similarity of just a little bit of the touch that both of those guys have. And I'm curious to see how Riley is going to recruit. It seems like a lot of the Brandon Streeter targets are still on the board for him, and he's been visiting them, going in person to see them. But the way that he constructs his roster, the way that he goes about this first and second class, it's going to tell you a lot about how he wants this offense to work at Clemson and how he's going to start designing things once he has his guys in the door. So there's almost a point where it's a little too early to try to break down too much. We just have to let him make his move and see if he wants, player A or player B, or if he's got his own guys that'll come in and try to change things up.
This may be a question that if you've gotten it before, definitely tell me, but what's the biggest challenge at Clemson? You think of these upper echelon teams like Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, you name a team like Oregon, and a lot of times you think of the resources, what they have, their advantages. I'm curious, you've had a couple of years that were at least nationally disappointing for Clemson. So as the national narrative has maybe switched from singing the praises of Dabo Swinney and whoever quarterback one is, with Trevor Lawrence obviously in the NFL now, what has been, in your experience, the biggest challenge for Clemson football, be it recruiting, on the field, etc.?
I think the biggest challenge is, and the jury's still out here, but I think the biggest challenge can be almost themselves, of the way that they conduct business, and it's fine to be this way, to be so hard set, but they're not going to get into an NIL bidding war. That's well publicized. That doesn't mean they don't allow players to sign deals and work deals. I think that's a misconception. There's guys like Jeremiah Trotter that have gotten solid deals or good enough for them to stay. Peter Woods out of recruiting got an NIL deal that he spoke highly about. So their problem is, not that they don't do NIL at all. They just don't do the bidding wars, which there's some prospects, and we see it in recruiting. We'll call a guy, oh, that's an NIL guy. Like, he's probably going to be one of those that goes to a school that is, going to give him a good deal. And I don't blame him. I'd probably do the same thing. I don't know. I don't know how I'd approach recruiting it. I don't understand, how these people can go through this process. There's so many factors. But
One question before we move over to the NFL side of things. You are always on Twitter covering recruiting, covering prospects, doing interviews with them, posting a lot of great content. Again, at Luke Winstel, if you want to go follow him on Twitter, it's well worth your time. What's recruiting coverage like nowadays in the NIL world? You know, when I covered it, it was before any of that was legal. I think we knew that at every school there was an element of that going on, but it was certainly never something that you saw or talked about just because it wasn't as visible as it is now. But nowadays, you go to 7-on-7, and you've got quarterbacks wearing pajama pants, and their brand deals with sunglasses and things like that. What's it like in this new era of 18-year-olds that have $1 million offers?
Yeah, the thing it's like now is, as a journalist, you have to have a healthy skepticism. I think if you cover recruiting, you have to have a ridiculously healthy level of skepticism. If someone tells you something, there's a very good chance it's not true. And if you report it, then that's on you. So you have to really understand when it comes to these things, just the importance of verification. You hear these $13 million contract offers, and I don't know anything about that, but I do know that Bryce Young was somewhere reportedly around 4 million. So I don't know how that's all structured. So you have to be skeptical of things. You have to be skeptical of a lot of the hype now. People get so hyped so quickly, and you hear, oh, this is going to be the next big guy. And sometimes you have sources you trust that really tell you that, but you have to break it down and try to keep a very cool tone about you, because it's very easy for one social media clip to make a player blow up, and all of a sudden someone's giving them stars, and now you got to follow the player. And now, is that real? Is it not? Are players rated this highly because of track times or politics, and how good are they actually at football? And a lot of them really are. So you just have to be able to weed through a lot of that, weed through the fact that your schedule is just year round in recruiting. There's dead periods, right? But all these players start committing during dead periods. So you're still writing during a dead period. You're still posting. Right. So it's a different world. It's a world where you really, can't take many days off, or else you can get passed. And there's plenty of times where that can happen. So, and then you look at these philosophies too, like some schools will toss out over 300 offers in a class. I don't know how you cover or follow that. I've tried to, and I have not done it successfully. And some schools like Clemson, and this is one thing going back to your previous question, I don't think Clemson helps themselves by how few players they've offered. Sure. 2024 class, they're only in the 40s right now. So there's plenty of relationships they have. There's some younger guys that are saying, hey, you guys really like me. Everyone else has offered me. Why haven't you? And that can be a thing where Clemson's having to talk to a guy and really have to get them to understand the culture and buy into the culture, when the kid might just say, okay, if you're not interested in me, if you're not believing in me, then they might move on, and you can miss out on some good players. And Clemson generally is very smart in terms of recruiting, so that strategy hasn't killed them yet, but it can be frustrating to watch. So you see all these different strategies play out, and there's a lot that goes into it. I enjoy the drama. The relationships of it are really, really fun, of the adults, the former NFL players, the different kids you get to meet on their way to superstardom. So there's plenty of drawbacks that have come with the new culture, and it's more important than ever for these kids to have a really strong circle around them of people that can guide them and really help them say, hey, keep your head on straight. And I think everyone needs that, especially with social media. It can be really easy, especially for a young person, to, chase something that maybe they shouldn't be. So I find a lot of times the people with strong inner circles are the people that are the most successful in this area. So that's a lot of what I've gotten to see.
Yeah, I love that, man. I was talking to an SEC recruiting insider on the phone the other day and asking him, hey, man, like when do you guys take vacations? And he just kind of, rolled his eyes over the phone, was like, man, I don't know. Like at this point, it's just 24/7. So certainly, round of applause for all the dedication, the excellence with which, all of your content stays. I know that's not easy. So big tip of the cap to you. let's move over from recruiting over to what is top of mind, at least at this point on the calendar. We
Yep.
just had the Senior Bowl. You were there. I want to talk about that. The NFL draft as well. And if you want to, talk about some Clemson players, we absolutely can. The top three that are being mentioned with that first round: Miles Murphy, the edge rusher; Brian Bresee, the interior defensive lineman; and then Trenton Simpson, who could be the first linebacker off the board. Not really sure who is going to be looking at linebacker first in this draft, but I've seen mock drafts that have had him going in the first, some in the early second. So I guess that's a pretty good place to start. Where do you think these top three Clemson Tigers ultimately fit, and how exciting is it to have gotten to watch them in their last year of college football and know, hey, these guys not only are going to be playing on Sundays, but could be some of the top 30 guys off the board.
For sure. And some of them, even like Miles Murphy, getting to see them come up out of high school in Georgia is some of the most rewarding stuff. If you look at a guy in high school to college to pro, and you don't always get to see that. It's pretty lucky that Clemson's so good developing, getting to cover that program, because not only do they get the 5 stars, but close to 80% of the 5 stars that Clemson has brought in under Coach Sweeney have gone to the NFL draft and been drafted. Wow. So those kinds of things, it's impressive. It's a good group. I like Simpson as the guy that I'd be most confident on if, let's say, my team picked him. I'm not saying he's the highest on the board, but I'd be most confident in Simpson because you know what you're getting. You're getting an athlete that's really good. If you want to get into passing downs, if you want to send him after a quarterback, those are the things that I'd feel very good about with Simpson. But the other two, Bresee and Murphy, have question marks to where if my team picked them in the top half of the first round in the NFL draft, I would reserve my judgment and not say it's a home run. If they were picked in the second round, I'd say probably good value. I mean, second half of the first round.
Sure.
Or later, probably good value. Definitely good in the second round. But Murphy's one that he's a good guy. He's fun to watch. There's definitely questions about the motor and questions about, you see him get off the bus, athletic freak, practicing, athletic freak in game. The thing that's just concerning is there'd be some games where I'd say, is he playing? Because I'm not sure I really see much out there. And that's my criticism. Otherwise, I say that after checking 9 boxes of brilliance. So don't get me wrong, but there's a couple of question marks, and there's a couple of games where you can't miss him, getting sacks and PFLs everywhere. His numbers were good. So there's a lot to like about Miles. There's a couple of question marks, as there are with every player, that the team just would have to do their due diligence on. And then for Bresee, there's not many people that face more adversity in their final season.
No kidding.
So it's hard to just judge a guy off of that, but at the same time, the sample size is not great from this past year. So I understand if you have question marks to solve there.
Right. Especially for Bresee, it's like a kind of a plus minus situation where it's like, oh my gosh, this guy has incredible drive, incredible motor, is going to be a great locker room guy because look at what he's gone through off the field, but also because of what he's gone through off the field, we don't have that much tape on him, right? Or that much overall production. Plus, is health a concern? How highly do you use a pick on him? I think that the ceiling is there for all three. For Bresee, I'll be honest, I'm putting together my first round mock draft kind of as we speak and trying to be so intentional about this before we go to the combine. I don't know where to put him. I think there are several fits down the board, especially like you mentioned, the second half of the first round. I don't know that I'd be comfortable drafting him in the top 10 where I've seen some mocks have him. Yeah. But man, if you can get him, close to that 20 spot, I think you're really, really happy, especially considering you could have maybe the top interior guy in Jalen Carter, the only guy that might go at that position group ahead of him, could be going 1 overall, right? So you could have a couple of different draft picks to think about where you could get Brian, and I'm really curious to see where he goes. I'm curious to see where I end up putting him as well. I just haven't quite come to a consensus there. Let's talk Senior Bowl. And you and I, right before we hit record it on this, we were talking about the social media coverage of it versus the reality. Sitting there for 2 days in the stands, watching every single rep. What's the difference between a guy like me that will watch all the social media clips that I can, that will watch the practice footage when it's uploaded to YouTube, but still a lot of that is compilations, a lot of that is cut, it's not each individual rep, to someone like you that watched it all, right? Raw, uncut, completely unedited. Um, you were telling me there's a little bit of a perception shift that you get if you're on my side of the phone screen.
I think so. And there's nothing wrong with that because I'm on that side of the phone screen a lot of times. So the thing that I will say that when you're there and then when you're in media and you're checking, like, watched every bit of tape as well back from the day. And the thing that you take away is what hits on social media. And this is funny as a reporter because I do this. I look at a play and I say, that's going to be great on social media. And I don't even have to say anything. I'm not telling you that this player is a great player, but I'm saying this player wins this rep on day one of the Senior Bowl. And I just put a hashtag and, at Senior Bowl. And all of a sudden, if I'm good at it, maybe it's 50,000 views if it's a good play. And we had a couple of those. And the thing to understand as well, the Senior Bowl credentials close to about 1,000 media members. So there are a lot of people seeing stuff, a lot of people there. Everyone's looking for their social media content. So there will be things like Malik Willis really blew up at the Senior Bowl. And was that deserved or worth it? Was it overhyped? Maybe not. That's a different conversation. But we're seeing that, every year now. There's so much traffic of these highlight reel plays that you might miss the other 3 or 4 that they got, blown off the ball or pancaked. Mm-hmm. So there were a few of those that I noticed. One of the ones that I say is a really good player, but just be careful on how crazy you go with this. Tank Dell out of Houston, really good day 2 pick, but now people are starting to slide him towards the end of round 1 or early round 2. And I'm saying, a few weeks ago, we were looking at him as like a 3rd or a 4th rounder, and he practiced for 2 days. And there's 3 days of Senior Bowl practice and then a game. So you're going to look at him for 2 practices, and of the 2 practices, there's about 2 5-minute drills that he dominated in 2 days. So you got 20 minutes, and maybe it's a minute of total tape on him. And now you're willing to say that was enough for you to move him up 20 or 30 spots. And I say, hold your horses. Like, if he's good at the combine and pro day 2, like, okay, we're getting there. But you really have to reserve your judgment because you look at the actual sample of it. You're comparing this to guys that played a whole season and had, maybe better production or better size or, so those kinds of things. So Dell is really good. Don't get me wrong, but we can't go too crazy on people like that, especially at a skill position.
You're preaching to the choir, my friend. I was so that, and I have nothing to compare this to other than my days as a beat writer where I would see something like that, right? Where one guy has a great rep and it blows up on social media and everybody pronounces him, a 1st-round talent. You're like, oh, no, that's not true. So it's interesting to hear you say that, especially with a guy like Tank Dell, who is a good receiver, will go on day 2. I mean, if he doesn't go on day 2, there's, something else has gone wrong.
Yep.
But you had people pronouncing him in the top 2-3 wide receivers on their draft board. And I was just sitting there scratching my head going, how? Yeah. I saw he undressed a slot corner in that drill. I get it. But you weren't saying that when he was playing Tulane, right? So anyway, you're like I said, you're preaching to the choir. I'll get off my soapbox. I want to go and hit a couple of positions with you and just get your thoughts. And I actually texted you this while you were at the Super Bowl and asked for your input on Stetson Bennett, what you were hearing around the Senior Bowl, just in chit chat, right? Is what was kind of the temperature of Stetson, who, boy, the timing could not have been worse for that guy, right? He wins a national championship. He has a little bit of a press snafu at the national championship parade, kind of snaps at a reporter. Then he gets arrested here in Dallas for, public intoxication. He spurns the invite from the Senior Bowl, it was just kind of a bunch of missteps all in a row. And I was curious, were you hearing that might be affecting his draft stock there in Mobile?
One of the things that can be underrated, maybe not to people like us, but in some of these situations, perception in PR is just, it's a big deal. And Stetson had everything perfectly laid out for him. The walk on that has the dog mentality and earns the job and shows all the intangibles, and he's a proven winner. And, nothing can stop him. He's at the pinnacle of college football for 2 straight years, and, really took a step forward this season, I thought, as well, in terms of on field performance. And everything's trending in the right direction to, fans are loving him and everyone's happy to line up for their Cane's chicken fingers because Stetson's serving at the window. And then now you've got people starting to go lukewarm, and it's in the media too. And, maybe even a little less than that of, he had everything perfectly laid out. The mailman. I mean, you can't PR this better and NIL it better in college football. But then you get to one thing after another to at the parade, you're not looking at the fans, then you say some stuff, and then there's now multiple occasions where he has been drunk around major events, one of them arrested for, missed media availability.
Sure.
This year, and they had Brock Bowers do the availability instead of the quarterback that the media was hoping to talk to. And last year,
Yeah.
so drunk on national TV. So now these things start to line up, and as you mentioned, the things that you say of, okay, we really liked you, but now this is a little much here. So there were some media members that were looking at that, and then they look at, before Hendon Hooker got hurt, Stetson Bennett and Hendon Hooker were the two that could have come to the Senior Bowl and just blown up their draft stock, because, all it takes for a guy that has good college tape that NFL scouts might question for one reason or another. All it takes, you come to the Senior Bowl and prove that you can do this against this NFL type talent and go knock out your interviews. And that was the big thing for Stetson of at the Senior Bowl, every player meets with every team. So all 32 teams get to interview you in some capacity. So I know Stetson will get his opportunities to talk to teams, but I thought at least, even if he didn't want to go play in the game or risk an injury, I thought it would at least be good for him to show up, and especially after some of the PR questions, be able to speak for himself, answer to some of that, maybe calm some concerns. So I'm not sure, what went into that decision. I'm sure him and his agent had their own, discussions and their own logic for it. But from a PR perspective, there were plenty of people starting to knock him and starting to say, hey, I'm not sure I believe in this guy, or I'm not sure this is a guy that really, could be that sleeper type of story in the NFL again.
Well, especially when you're drafting him as a late day 2, somewhere on day 3 quarterback, right? And I say late day 2, I mean, that's not going to happen, but you know what I mean? Not a top draft pick. You are bringing him in as a backup to learn, to see, okay, if we develop him, does he turn into something, right? So at that point, he's a culture guy. You need him to check all the boxes and to have the dress whites pressed and ready to go. You need him to look good for your organization. I don't know that Stetson has really done that when given some of these opportunities. So I am interested to see where he goes. I mean, at this point, I don't think he's going to go undrafted. I think somebody will draft him. But man, like you said, you start to go, okay, well, actually, we might lean towards this guy or that guy, right? And there's just reasons to now pick somebody over him that I think he could have easily avoided. So we'll see what ends up happening with Stetson. Let's do some position quick hitters. You were there. You got to watch. I'd love to know offensively, and let's do skill positions. Who are some of your big winners from the Senior Bowl? Who just stood out to you as you watched them on the field?
Let's see. We'll go a little running back here. I thought Kenny McIntosh reaffirmed a lot of what we already thought about him. I don't see him going as even a high day 2 guy. Maybe he's round 3, round 4. But McIntosh showed that he can be a good pass catcher. He can run the ball. I think the pass catching ability is, we knew that was going to catch people's eye at the NFL level. So I don't see him as a bell cow in the NFL, but I see him as a productive guy that you mix into an offense and have catch passes. I think it provides value, and he proved that. The running back group was a lot of middle of the pack guys from the way that I just saw that of, hey, your team takes him in the fourth round. Good. That's cool. Third round, maybe fifth round, for some of them is definitely a possibility, but it's a lot of those types that sit kind of 4 to 5 for me
Mm-hmm.
on the board. I think a guy like Tyjae Spears had a couple of good plays, but he wasn't spectacular. But he wasn't mind-blowingly good, but he was very good. So it was those kinds of things, like he helped himself, but we're not going to overhype it. And Cameron Peoples, I thought, had some good moments, but it was a lot of that. It wasn't a ton of just this guy blew my mind at the running back spot. I think at receiver, Tank Dell, we already talked about. Rashee Rice, to me, is a very good day 2 pick, pretty much late second, early third.
Mm-hmm.
SMU. So he
Love
checks
hearing that.
yeah, he checks some physical boxes. He's the player that runs crisp routes. He had some good releases. So there's plenty of things that in the NFL you can work with. You can see him as a, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type of guy. He'll contribute. I really wish that Andre Yosevich from Princeton, I wish he got some better throws. The quarterback group was not very good. So there were
Mm-hmm.
a couple of routes that might have been good for social media that you might have seen us tweet, but he didn't make the catch and the ball was 5 yards in front of him, and
Yeah.
it's hard to sell on Twitter. So so some of those plays that he might have made didn't get made, but I think that it's always intriguing to have a Princeton prospect in your top 200. So
Sure.
that's another guy. Outside of that, Puka Nakua practiced for one day, kind of
Mm-hmm.
blew us away a bit on day 1 on the national team, and then that was it. So it's hard to evaluate one practice, but
Yeah.
from the 20 minutes I saw him run routes, he looked like a good draft pick. So that's one
Yeah.
of the hard things to evaluate.
Yeah. Some of these guys, I tell you what, they play chess, not checkers, and it does not make our job as evaluators, as social media personalities easy at all, because it's like, where do you rank this? Like, I don't want to, basically clickbait everybody by saying, oh, he's the next great receiver, but also like, if I don't say anything and he does turn out to be good, and that was my hunch, like I'm gonna kind of be kicking myself for not posting that. So I get that as well. Tight end is supposed to be a really deep group this year. Was there any one tight end that kind of stood out to you?
We knew that because of his stature and because of some of the hype he's gotten over the past year, that Luke Musgrave would be somebody to watch. He was good. I think he's probably a good second round tight end for a team out there. But
Mm-hmm.
to answer your question, the one that was a real riser to me was Payne Durham. I don't think he's going to be even a day 2 guy. It's probably middle of day 3 if we're looking at his stock. But he went from, being in the 200s to maybe late 100s, maybe 180 or so on a big
Mm-hmm.
board, because the scrappiness, the physicality that translated from Purdue to this level. But his pass catching, he had several touchdowns and they were eye-catching plays. Had one play where he was sandwiched in between a couple of defensive backs and was able to come through. So the way a lot of those tight end drills work is it's tight end versus safety, and Durham was a mismatch. Whenever he did get separation, that's always impressive. He did that a few times, but his ability to make the tough catches with a safety draped all over him and be able to take that down, break tackles. So in 1v1s, but especially when they got to 7-on-7 or 11-on-11, that's where he was at his best. So there's a lot to like about Payne Durham as maybe a tight end 2 for an NFL team at his peak.
Let's go inside the trenches. And one of my retweets was from Isaiah Foskey, a great rep that he had against Michigan's right tackle. And I'm sure you're very familiar with the clip. Kind of bowls him over, gets to the quarterback. And in that vacuum, I tweeted, I might be a little bit low on Foskey. I just don't remember consistently seeing some of that power that he flashed in that rep. Well, then of course it's like the very next rep he gets sat on by Paris Johnson Jr., right? So when you were watching the battles in the trenches, whether it be tackles and guards or edge rushers, who stood out to you? And maybe was there somebody that you thought, I kind of thought I'd see a little bit more out of this guy?
Foskey's a hard one to evaluate because he's one I feel more comfortable talking about because we saw 3 practices and I think we saw a bit of the game from Foskey as well,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. So at least the 3 practices, I'm familiar with that film very much so. And day one had some ups and downs. Foskey was one that came in, this is a media guy. When someone is the headline of the opening press conference, they're pretty highly thought of. So Foskey was the defensive headliner, Max Duggan from TCU, the offensive headliner. And for Foskey coming in, that was the thing of this could be the Jermaine Johnson type of player that goes from day 2 into day 1 with a good performance. And this could be the start of, because Foskey there, I mean, you look at his numbers in college, 20 plus sacks in the past 2 years. There's plenty of pass rushing ability that he's put on tape. And you look at that, and, if an NFL team doesn't like pass rush, they're crazy. So there was a lot of those different things that you look at and you say, hey, this could be a guy. And the rep against Hayes was good, but then it seemed like every time we saw a good flash, we saw him getting pancaked, or we saw like DeJuan Jones from Ohio State blocking him to the sideline, for example. And
Yeah, that was tough.
And after that, it seemed like we didn't hear a whole lot from Foskey on day 2 or 3. There were good performances, but just not a lot of flash that we might have been expecting of that potential, or maybe the guy that does a spin move and everyone's in the crowd like, whoa, look at that. So that's Foskey's a tough one to evaluate. I still think he's a good 2nd-round pick. That's the way I feel about Foskey. So you look at D-line, I thought we'd get a little more from Keon White from Georgia Tech. He did better as the week went on, but we interviewed him after day 1, and he said something to the tune of his pass rushing sucked. Like he just wished that he had a better day as a pass rusher. And I think it comes from a perspective thing of he's used to being dominant in the ACC. Like some of these guys were just bigger than him, and they were able to win some reps that he was probably used to winning. So I think that might have been a moment for Keon where he was like, oh, okay, this is really the level of talent we're dealing with. And he adjusted after day 1 and he got better. So some people are talking a little crazy about him being like a high first rounder. I think that's a little much. I see him as another good 2nd-round pick. You take him in the 2nd, you're happy. You got talent. I was disappointed with Andre Carter. I really did not see much from him out of Army, and he's one that I want to root for just as a person. Great story, and he's got plenty of athleticism, twitch, bend. The thing is the weight. He's just can't compete with these guys right now. So he's one that you take him, you've got to add weight, you've got to work on that raw potential, and then that's another guy that day 2, you have to understand he's a project, but the ceiling is high enough to justify a day 2 pick on Carter. But in the present, the film didn't blow me away. Keanu Benton from Wisconsin, I thought really helped himself. Yaya Diaby from Louisville showcased some good bend at his size, so he might go a little higher on a day 3 board. Offensive line was a really good group, if you want to get into that one. Really good.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So typically offensive line is the group that I enjoy watching in film. I'm not going to nail every technique and be able to tell you, oh, well, on this rep, his hand placement was, kind of shades of perfect and this one sucked. Like I'm not going to be able to tell you that specifically, but overall grading this offensive line group, it's hard, man, because so many of them feel like, okay, well, I mean, I could see taking him at the end of the first. I could see taking him at the end of the first. Is that, what's the difference between a 1st-round grade, a 2nd-round grade? Now are we starting to slip into 3rd-round grades? Like, they're all kind of tightly bunched for me. So, yeah, I mean, feel free to take that wherever you'd like.
Sure. So Darnell Wright from Tennessee got some buzz for the 1st round. Another SEC guy, Osiris Torrance, got some buzz. Those guys were able to hold it down. And the reason that I really was confident in some of their film was they were doing it against some kind of name brand guys, like people we
Hmm.
watch in the SEC week in and week out. So that was one of the things that helps of when you look at the matchup and you say, okay, they're beating a Alabama defensive lineman to the rep and you know the name. So those two are some that generated a lot of that. Some of the offensive line, like interior guys, don't get a ton of buzz because that edge rusher versus offensive tackle is where a lot of people want to look.
Hmm.
But John Michael Schmitz and Steve Avila were two of the interior guys that stood out. Those are good. A project player on the O line, Wanye Morris out of Oklahoma. He's got size, showed some ability to put up some good reps against edge guys like Ollie Gay out of LSU and a couple of those types that are super athletic. So you got to like him. We didn't see a whole lot of Warren McClendon from Georgia, but when he was out there, he was bullying people. On the other team, national team offensive line, Cody Mock helped himself. DeJuan Jones only practiced for a day, but that was a heck of a day.
Yes, it was.
So those are some of the guys that, when you take away names, those are people that I think capitalized on the Senior Bowl and were able to move up boards. I think Schmitz, Wright, and Jones and Mock, I guess, would be the four that I think
Yeah.
really helped most.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that kind of selfishly because I've got decent grades on all those. I love Darnell Wright. I understand the concern that, hey, he kind of didn't really put it together until this last season, but gosh, you watch that Tennessee Alabama tape, man, and he handles Will Anderson, right? I mean, just rep after rep. He's constantly in the right place at the right time. I thought the clips that I saw from him at the Senior Bowl were very, very impressive. So I'm really interested to see where he goes. And then, yeah, grading those guards, it's really tough. Like I've got Peter Skoronski graded as a guard. I've got Mock graded as a guard interior as well.
Yep.
I just think that, that's where they're going to really flourish. Especially Skronsky, who's more technique oriented. I don't know that I love him out at tackle, but at the same time, like you could have a team like the Texans take him with that second first round pick if he's there because of the versatility, right? You can slide him out to tackle, or you can have him play guard, which is definitely a need of theirs. So I'm so excited to see on draft day where these guys go, how they get ranked, and then to get to watch their careers from there. Let's talk secondary, and then we'll let you get out of here. Secondary, the wide receiver versus the cornerback, or sometimes even the safeties, very polarizing on social media. Like you mentioned with tackle and edge rusher, that's kind of the sexy clip to tweet, and no clips get more retweets than clips where a wide receiver is burning a defensive back by 10 yards, or similarly when a wide receiver just gets sat on a route and that defensive back smothers him. So take me through some guys in the secondary, whether they're corners or safeties, that you thought, okay, yeah, this guy can play. And similarly, a guy that maybe you're like, I really wanted to see a little bit more out of him for whatever reason.
One of the ones that intrigues me on, I guess we'll start national team here, JL Skinner from Boise State. He's a
Yeah.
hard hitter. He's a big body, long arms. So physically, check some boxes. Hard hitter. That's fun to see. Even in practice, you saw him. It looked like he's about to light somebody up, and he could have, but it's practice. So he kind of
Yeah.
eases off, and you say, oh, man, that would have been a Cam Chancellor kind of hit if this was in game. And the way that he's able to be an enforcer, I didn't really see him get beat in coverage when they got into like 11 on 11s very often, if really at all. So he's one that I think another good day two pick, probably a late second, early third rounder territory for me. Caillou Blue Kelly out of Stanford was kind of all over boards, somewhere between 90 and 130, depending on what outlet you checked. And he was able to show that in coverage. He had an interception to finish, I think, day two. He had the pick. And the ability that he had to defend some of the faster receivers, I thought was impressive. Defensively, Jamie Robinson from Florida State on the American team was intriguing. His leadership ability. He's a South Georgia guy, so I've gotten to see him a little bit and hear about him on his rise. But at the Senior Bowl, I thought he was solid, didn't blow me away. Chris Smith at the Senior Bowl out of Georgia was another big name that was there that I thought was solid. Didn't blow me away, but he's another pick that I think in the third round somebody's going to get a good DB out of Smith. And Tyreek Stevenson from Miami might have been the biggest riser. I'm
Okay.
not sold on the first round conversation for him yet, but I like him in the second.
Okay.
That's
I haven't even seen first round conversation for him. So
oh,
it's good to know that it's out there. Maybe I need to. I thought I read a lot of draft content. Maybe I need to up it because I've got a 2-3 tweener grade on him from what I've seen. I
yep.
was not aware of the first round conversation.
So this was one of the head scratchers for me. So I'm checking this out here. Projected as a first rounder in a mock draft right before the Senior Bowl. It was February 2nd. It was
Okay.
one of the bigger mocks, I guess, here. But yeah, so Stevenson, I like him in coverage. He's got the combination of the speed and the aggressiveness and the footwork. The hips, I think, were one of the more impressive things. Like you look at
Mm.
some corner prospects and say, okay, I'm, not sure about that. But Stevenson, it seems like really has elevated himself on that side of things. So the coverage ability that we saw from him, especially on the boundary, reading balls, making plays on the ball, that was interesting. But yeah, there were a couple of mocks that had him up there, either in the first or close to it. So I'm not sold on that, but I think second round could be a possibility just because of
Yeah.
positional value as well.
Sure. I again, corner is another position that I have so much trouble ranking. I mean, I've gone back and forth on my top three. I've had Witherspoon as my top corner right now. Christian Gonzalez is kind of my top corner. So, and then Joey Porter Jr. There's kind of a consensus top three. Although I saw Cam Smith from South Carolina just go, I want to say in the top 20 in a mock draft as well. I know there's questions about whether he's a first rounder or not. Emmanuel Forbes, how highly do you move him up the board? There seems like a lot of growing sentiment that Forbes is kind of that sleeper. And help me with this. So I've had a lot of trouble ranking kind of Keely Ringo, Deontay Banks, Clark Phillips III, Eli Ricks. All of those guys have issues, their own separate issues that make me go, oh, do I really want him on my team if this doesn't get fixed? So out of that group, I know Keely Ringo is the guy that draws a lot of attention because he was cornerback one for back-to-back national champions, right, in Georgia. Had some awesome reps. Had some times where he just sat on a receiver, makes the highlight play that everyone will remember against Alabama to seal that game. Also had some moments where it was like, dude, what is he doing? So maybe close us out on this. Where do you think Keely Ringo ranks kind of in true talent, and where do you think teams evaluate him right now?
Ringo is going to be the type of corner to me that, especially as a rookie in the NFL, might be a little frustrating because he's a bit handsy. So there's going to be some PI calls just regardless of who it is. And you have to know that coming in. So the speed is got a good chance to blow people away. And that's where, again, you have to temper yourself of, who is this guy on film? Who are we really talking about? Because if he goes out and runs a 4.2 or a low 4.3, like people say he might, then, that's going to cloud some things, I think, in the evaluation area. So I think Ringo, he was mocked in the first round for a while, and now we've got people seeing him in, second round or, even late second now. I would say I would pick him kind of mid 40s. That's the way that I feel in terms of just to put a number on it. I think speed is the biggest pro, the size. He fits the mold of what a lot of NFL defenses would like out of a corner. So those boxes are checked. The interception ability against some of the best receivers in the game is another box checked. But the tough part of Ringo is the handsiness at times. We saw some PI calls. I think we saw at least one against Tennessee as well in some of the bigger games. So that's one thing I watch out for against Ringo. I do like the competitive ability of him to go up against the number one receiver week in and week out. And even when he gets beat, he comes back. So those kinds of things, it seems like he's got a good mentality to him. But I'm just not sold on the he's one of those at the hips I'm not quite as sure about of his ability, on some of those routes to defend. So the coverage is something that can be a work in progress. I don't see him quite stacking up to a Witherspoon level. So with all that being said, I think he's a really good prospect, but I just don't see him as a top 3 or 4 corner in this draft.
Yeah. I've got him, you said somewhere in the mid 40s, early mid 40s. That's kind of where I've got him graded as well. My top 100, late 30s, early 40s, somewhere in there where I think, gosh, a team that gets him in the second round is going to go, all right, let's ride. Let's find the way to best utilize his talent. But first round, to me, it would feel like a little bit of a reach. So certainly appreciate your insight on that. And man, I tell you what, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast here tonight. I know we were texting, we were talking about 45 minutes tops. We've gone 15 minutes past that. So I certainly want to get you out of here on a high note, but tell the listeners again where they can find you on all of your social media.
Yeah, for me, I always say I'm lucky that there's not a whole lot of Luke Winstels out there. So it's at Luke Winstel, Winstel on social media. And try not to be too hard to find, keep the DMs open if anyone ever wants to reach out. So just out there covering football, glad to do it. And social media, Instagram and Twitter are the 2 biggest ones. So that's where a lot of my content goes.
Well, there you go, man. We wish you the absolute best. Hopefully you get some sort of vacation. And I know you're, obviously still doing classes as well. So somewhere in this process, I hope you get a breath. You get to go sip a cool beverage on a beach somewhere and just kind of rest from all the excellent content that you put out. You're certainly one of the up and coming names in the industry and some of my favorite content to consume over on the social media.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on, and thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, there he goes, Luke Winstel. Again, go find him on social media. Follow him for all the draft coverage, Clemson sports, as well as we head towards football season in 2023. To our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. Glad to have you with us each and every week. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious, how